Because this item is a coin, there's a whole extra section just on coin specific information, and that includes things like the denomination, the ruler, the obverse, the reverse, all that sort of information, which is so important, as you'll see later. Perhaps the most important information we record is the find spot for each object, but again, this is sensitive information. Many detectorists now use GPS devices to record the find spot of each object, and we record that data as precisely as possible. But on the general public part of the database, we only give away a 4-figure grid reference, so 1 square kilometre. And on the map, we only outline the parish where the object was found. And for some particularly sensitive objects, we're even more cautious than that. This helps to protect the find spot and the landowner from the attention of criminals. People who want more detailed find spot information have to apply for researcher level access to the data, and they're vetted first. So if you're planning to do a project and you want to use PAS data, that's probably possible, but you will need to allow time to put in your application and provide some references just to make sure that we're protecting all that data. So the database then is like a giant virtual museum, a resource ready to be tapped. But what's my role in this work? Most of the people working for the PAS are flows like me. In addition, there's a small management team at the British Museum of 3 people, and there's also a small team of national finds advisors who are specialists in specific periods, and they train the flows and manage the quality of the data. What do flows do? Well, mainly we liaise with finders and identify and record finds. This means working with a wide range of specialists and professionals. Though many flows have a specialism, on the whole, we tend to be generalists, which is my excuse when you ask me difficult questions. We have to be able to identify everything from Paleolithic hand axes to Victorian false teeth and everything in between. So it's not actually that useful to have a flow who only has a really specialist knowledge of one very small group of objects. As well as all those other things on the slide, I manage a team of volunteer assistants, and I have a fairly large team here in South and West Yorkshire. We've got 13 people, some of whom come into the office normally to work alongside me, some of whom record from the comfort of their own home or record their own finds. Flows need a set of special skills in addition to the technical knowledge and the social skills required. One is the skill to be able to read very small corroded writing on coins. So on this coin, even though we can't read the obverse at all, and I admit that one is too far gone, we can still identify this coin down to a 2-year period, and we can tell where it was minted. Mainly from this letter C here on the reverse. We can see that it's a nummus, so it's a 4th century Roman coin. We can see that the reverse type has 2 victories holding reeves on it. You can see the head of one victory here and her body, her arm sticking out here, holding a reef, and there's a mirror image of a second victory on this side. So we can tell the type. We can read this lettering or enough of it to know that it does say the standard inscription. And that C narrows down the options of mint marks enough to say that it's minted at Trier. So even the grottiest coin, and that's the sort of technical term that metal detectorists and flows use for the horrible coins, even the grottiest coin can often be identified surprisingly precisely. And we spend a lot of time encouraging people to show us all their grots. Another skill you need is being able to recognise tiny fragments of objects. So I've put this one up to show you, and you can have a ponder about that while I tell you a little bit more about PAS. PAS was launched as a pilot scheme in 1997 in just 6 areas of the country, and then it worked, so it was expanded into a national scheme in 2003. We only cover England and Wales because the laws about metal detecting are different in Scotland and Northern Ireland. So I'm hoping you might have been able to guess what this object is. Here it is in situ, as it were, on a more complete object. It's the head loop, the wire head loop, and part of the enamelled collar from the top of a head stud brooch. Head stud brooches are an extremely common find up here in Yorkshire, but they're not so well known in the south. So it's quite amusing. We have a staff forum where all the flows can talk to each other, and often one of our southern colleagues will post on the staff forum with a cry of "Help, what's this weird brooch?" And we all go, "Ha, it's a northern type, it's a head stud brooch." It's called a head stud brooch because of this stud on the head of the brooch, imaginative. And there's a slightly weird subtype which have two studs on the top of the brooch, which again are really quite rare among the data set, and that's the type we're interested in, although they don't seem to be a Yorkshire type as such, or even a northern type, but they're quite interesting. Here's another test of your flow super skills. You need to have an encyclopedic knowledge of weird and wonderful object types from every time period. So by looking at this, I wonder if you can puzzle out what it was used for. It's a fairly young object by our standards. There is no way we can record every object that is found. I doubt we could even if there were twice as many flows. So we aim to record every object which is older than AD 1540 and as many younger ones as we can in the time available. So we will often manage to record most of the 16th and 17th century objects, but items that are younger than that normally have to have something a bit special about them to justify recording them. Having said that, we don't have a cut-off date. It's down to flow discretion and local circumstances, and we record some very modern objects indeed if they're of particular interest. And this, I don't know, you probably worked out that this is a screw thread, so this part turns and this part comes down. And on this plate here, there's a hollow where you could put your cob nut or your hazelnut, and then by twisting this down, it will break the shell. So it's a nutcracker. So this is no ordinary nutcracker. This is combined, the underside of this plate has this seal matrix impression as well, so that you can use it to seal your letters. And it's a 17th to 18th century multi-tool gadget. Being fond of gadgets and novelty items is not a modern phenomenon. Now, the reason that PAS was established in 1997 is all to do with treasure. And it's no, not that sort. That's not what we normally see. In 1996, the law of treasure trove was updated. There was an increasing concern that some very significant archaeological finds, such as the Sutton Hoo ship burial, were not treasure under the Act as it was, because treasure trove had to be buried with the intention of recovering it, and Sutton Hoo wasn't, so it couldn't automatically enter public ownership. By 1996, there'd been enough campaigns and the momentum had got behind the idea about changing the law, and the new 1996 Treasure Act redefined treasure and specified that finders and landowners should be rewarded for treasure which was claimed by the Crown. And it's still the case that treasure belongs to the Crown. However, what happens these days is that the Crown offers items of treasure to local museums and they get first refusal on anything they want to acquire that counts as treasure. This gold signet ring, actually, I said gold, I think it's silver gilt actually, but this signet ring was acquired by Bradford Museums through the Treasure Act. And it's got a privy mark or a merchant's mark on it. And it'd be nice if one day we could team up with some historical researchers and archivists to see if we can identify who this mark belonged to. There was also recognition in government that although treasure was now protected by the new Act, the great majority of archaeological finds would remain outside its scope. And that's what encouraged the establishment of the PAS. At the time, I don't think anyone realised quite how many non-treasure finds there were out there. Treasure remains a key part of the flow role, and in fact, we've become more and more involved in treasure administration over time. Let's take this find as an example. So in 2016, not quite so recent, but not too bad. In 2016, local metal detectorist Jeff Wallbank found this gold coin in Silsden. He reported it to me, he being one of my regular detectorists, and I took it in for recording. Now, normally a single gold coin wouldn't count as treasure under the Act. For coins, you have to have hoards, so 2 or more silver or gold coins and 10 or more copper alloy coins. But this one is actually a stray find from the Silsden hoard, which Jeff discovered in 1998. As an addenda to the hoard, it's my job to complete a treasure declaration form, to notify the coroner, and then to identify the coin. Then I wrote a curatorial report for the benefit of the coroner, and I liaised with the finder, the landowner, the coroner, the treasure team, and the museum, and I cared for the coin while the treasure case progressed. The coin itself is an Iron Age stater. It was struck under the leader Cunobelinus, who controlled much of southeastern Britain. And I fought long and hard when deciding what to talk about whether I could really cope with all the long tongue-twistery words in this section, so bear with me. The coin would have been minted at Colchester, known as Camulodunum, and it's a beautiful coin with very little wear. You can see Camu on this side, short for Camulodunum, and CUN here, short for Cunobelinus. It does seem a little bit out of place up here in West Yorkshire. The rest of the hoard was declared as treasure in 1998, so it was one of the first treasure cases to be examined under the new Act. There were 27 staters. This is how they're displayed in Cliff Castle Museum. And those 27 staters were recovered by Jeff while he was metal detecting. And then another coin was recovered during the excavation of the find spot that followed. The hoard is interesting for us up here because 20 of the coins are those of Cunobelinus. Like the addendum, they have very little wear and they are late types and they date from around AD 40. But what are they doing so far north of their usual area of circulation? As you'll know, Silsden's in the territory controlled by the Brigantes, who didn't issue their own coins. So up here, we mainly see Iron Age coins of the neighbouring Corioltave from the Lincolnshire area. The combination of light wear and late types suggests that the Cunobelinus coins arrived in Yorkshire soon after the Claudian invasion in around AD 43. And it's been suggested that the coins were deposited by refugees fleeing from the advance of the Roman army. Now, one of PAS's Roman coin advisors, one of our national finds advisors, is Sam Moorhead. And if you ever get the chance to hear him speak or read his work, you should do, because he's very entertaining, very knowledgeable, great teacher. He's published a paper on the Malpas hoard, which is from Cheshire, which you can hopefully see as this red star here. That's the Malpas hoard. And he raises the possibility that the Malpas hoard and the Halifax hoard, which is from this red star here, are connected. He says they're both connected to the legendary flight of Caraticus. Now, as you'll remember, Caraticus was one of Cunobelinus's sons, and yet another C word, which is hard to say. And Caraticus was a fierce opponent of the Romans. This is the area where Caraticus and Cunobelinus were active most of the time. But in Caraticus's guerrilla warfare against the Romans, he retreated back and took a stand against them here somewhere in North Wales. He lost that confrontation, and many of his family were captured and taken off to Rome as prisoners. But Caraticus himself escaped, and he fled to Queen Cartimundia of the Brigantes, probably to Stannic, this black square, which is where we interpret as being the main seat of power of the Brigantes. Both the Malpas and the Halifax hoards contain lightly worn coins of the southern regions where Caraticus is known to have been active, and they were both deposited in the first years of the Roman invasion. They are also both on the route that we can expect Caractacus might have taken from North Wales towards Stannick. I've added this blue dot to show where Silsden is, and given that Silsden contains similar coin types and that Iron Age coin hoards are rare in this area, we've only got 3 from West Yorkshire and 3 from North Yorkshire. I don't think it's too fanciful to suggest that the Silsden hoard could fit into that Caractacus episode, as Sam suggests for Malpas and Halifax. So I think that shows how single finds and important finds that are exciting gold, shiny, silver things can help to tell a story and be related to historical events, semi-historical events. In due course, the addenda coin which I dealt with was offered to Bradford Museums and Galleries as treasure, but unfortunately they were unable to acquire it, so it was returned to the finder. Now this graph shows how the number of treasure cases has increased since the first years of the Act. So we started off with about 200, and we're now getting between 1,000 and 1,200 every year. So the treasure system is having to cope with 5 to 6 times as many finds as it did at first. The treasure system allows museums to have a chance to acquire significant finds, and many have been acquired, but most treasure cases are not significant enough to be worth the trouble of acquiring them. So this map shows areas where a lot of treasure is found and areas where treasure is acquired. And you can see we don't get very many here. Most of the treasure finds I deal with actually come from Yorkshire or Lincolnshire, because my detectives travel down there. So some of the finds that we record a lot of as treasure meet the criteria of treasure, but they're not actually that interesting. And a good example is 17th century cufflinks. So 20 years ago, when the Act was changed, they didn't even count as treasure, because the Treasure Act says that an item has to be 300 years old when it was found. So they were too young. But now they are old enough to count as treasure. So we get lots and lots of 17th century silver cufflinks, which are really don't tell us very much. They're fairly mass produced, but we have to put them through the Treasure Act in the same way. You can also see how great a variation there is of how much treasure is found across the country. This mainly reflects the number of detecting finds in total, which varies across the country. Let me show you that. Yes, so this is all find spots up to a few years ago on this map, and it shows you the national spread of data. And you don't need to be able to see individual dots to be able to see that it's mainly a rural data set. So it's almost the opposite of the picture that we get from development-led professional archaeology, which is mainly urban. There are biases in the data, and a really useful piece of work has been done by Catherine Robbins. You can get her PhD, and you can also get a guide by her from our website talking about bias which is inherent in the PAS data. And again, if you're thinking of doing any research using PAS data, it's vital that you understand those biases. So the greatest bias is probably a reflection of the access that metal detectorists have to land where they can get permission to detect. So we tend to see as gaps in our data moorland and mountains, places where it's not easy to physically get the metal detect. We've also got holes where there are cities, especially here in West Yorkshire. This big swathe down the middle is where the cities are, because you don't get a lot of metal detecting in the middle of the town centre. There's also the pattern of land use, so you get more finds and therefore more people detect on arable land, and not so much detecting happens on grassland. And then access, the A1 corridor is always really clear on any of these distribution maps, and that's because there's a small window of opportunity in the arable calendar when detectorists can get on the land, and as they drive along the main roads they can see which fields have been ploughed, and if they have permission or they're seeking permission, they can target those fields more easily because they can see when is the moment they've been harvested and they can get on them. There's also bias created by history. So the lack of coins in this area is because this was all underwater until fairly recently, so not many Roman coins in that area. And there are also patterns to do with land ownership. So the National Trust don't allow metal detecting, the Forestry Commission don't allow metal detecting. And there are certain big estates in our part of Yorkshire where nobody has permission to metal detect. Here in West Yorkshire, just to go against what I've just said, we do get quite a lot of fines from the Pennines, but these are mainly from field walkers who are recovering flints rather than people who are metal detecting. The flints I've recorded from West Yorkshire are particularly interesting. I have several very keen flint walkers, and I've also recorded some extremely large older collections of flints, including this microlith, which we recorded last year. And for those who are interested in these sorts of things, it's the geometric Group B microlith. The Mesolithic microliths from West Yorkshire are distinctive, partially because of their small size. This is a typical example, but many are smaller than that, and some are absolutely minute. There are distinctly different styles of microliths known from different areas. So in the early Mesolithic, we see star car assemblages and deep car assemblages. In the 1960s, these different groups were interpreted as being different population groups, but more recent thinking is that these differences are caused by chronology and they are differences against time. The notably small microliths from West Yorkshire are suggested to be discovered because the layers of peat that are eroding where my finders are working date from a specific time, and that perhaps those layers aren't currently being exposed in other parts of the country. We also need to be aware that my field walkers are combing the landscape on their hands and knees looking for these tiny flints. In professional archaeology, these artifacts wouldn't be recovered unless you were using a good sieving strategy, and even then they would only be recovered if the mesh of the sieve was smaller than that which is commonly used on sites. So, as you've seen from the map of finds, we record a lot. To get to the 1.5 million objects, PAS records about 70 to 80,000 objects every year. In my office, we do about 2,000 records a year, and that's between 3,000 and 4,000 objects. The volume recorded is limited by time and resources, not by how much is being found or how much is being offered to us for recording. We record more coins than any other find type. There are over 450,000 coins, and most of those are Roman coins. There are over 278,000 Roman coins on the database. According to Andrew Brown, who is our other PAS Roman coin advisor, this data set is, to quote, unparalleled anywhere in the world. So every year we are recording individual rare coins or new types. One example is this Denarius of Hadrian, which was recorded by my volunteer Graham last year, 2019. The reverse depicts Securitas, as you can read and hopefully see. And although this reverse type is known, it had never been recorded before, combined with this obverse where the bust is laureate. You can see his laurel wreath. It's only been found before with bareheaded busts. So that's a new type, and it's now been published by Andrew. With the vast number of coins that are recorded, we can also use applied numismatics to tease out patterns. I don't think this is the right time to go in depth into reanalysis techniques, but there are some features that are so obvious that we can see them without doing any statistical analysis at all. For example, the divide between the northwest and the northeast, which is very pronounced. This is probably because the East Riding in particular became very important in the 3rd century as prime grain growing region, a prime agricultural region for grain growing. Barbarian raids on the continent in the 3rd century cut off the supply of grain from the Rhineland, making grain from Britain extremely valuable and enriching the farming community of the northeast, hence all these coins. The fleets of ships carrying grain are recorded in historical sources and they are depicted on coins, and now we can also see that pattern in the coin loss. The vast majority of finds recorded by PAS come from arable land, where the plough digs deeper every few years. This slide has been passed from flow to flow so many times that its origins are now lost in the mists of time. So I'm afraid I can't tell you what site this is. If anybody knows, please put an answer on a postcard or in the chat for me. But I suspect it's an Anglo-Saxon cemetery site. It clearly shows the damage that can be done by modern agricultural techniques with these plough furrows striping across the subsoil there and taking the top off each of these urns. I presume they're cremation urns, you can see, or marked. This is how the artifacts are carried up to the surface and spread across the field. If they're recovered by metal detectorists during the first year of disturbance, they're usually not too badly damaged, and if they're plotted with GPS, they can still be associated back to the individual burials as they haven't travelled too far. But the successive years of ploughing spread the finds further and further and damage them, so that we quite often see coins that are completely chopped in half by machinery. There's research ongoing at the moment into plough soil archaeology and the value that finds have, even if they're in the plough soil, which is normally considered to be out of context and therefore not very useful. It's our role as Flows to continue to promote best practice to our finders, including the importance of the finders recording the exact find spot of everything they discover so that we can reinterpret what they're finding. One aspect of best practice which we try hard to instill in our finders is to resist the temptation to keep digging when a find is discovered in situ. It can be tricky to tell as the top part of the find is disturbed by the plough, but once the finder realises that they're below the plough soil, we ask them to stop digging and call in professional help. That's exactly what the finder of the Wold Newton hoard did, allowing the context to be explored and the vessel to be block lifted. This is the largest Numai hoard from northern Britannia. It dates from about 307, and the hoard is excavated in the lab, preserving the stratigraphy of the coins, and that showed that the hoard was amassed in 2 distinct groups, one earlier than the other. So layers 9 to 6 were one group of coins, and then the top layers were the second group. Also, insect remains were trapped in those layers. They would never have been recovered if the hoard hadn't been excavated professionally, and they had the potential to reveal what time of year the hoard was buried, except, annoyingly, they were inconclusive. Another assemblage which benefited from professional excavation was Bradford's own Stanbury urns. These Bronze Age cremation urns were found during garden landscaping, but luckily the finder realised that they were something special and contacted the museum, who arranged for professional excavation. The finds were 3 ceramic urns, an accessory vessel here, a battle axe, a bone pin and a bone belt fastener, and these 2 fragments of copper alloy. My involvement was really only dealing with the treasure side of things. Now, those of you who've been paying really close attention will immediately wonder why this find would count as treasure since there's no gold or silver. You're absolutely right, well spotted, but in 2003, the Treasure Act was amended to include prehistoric base metal assemblages. So these 2 tiny fragments of copper alloy are enough to make this hoard treasure. The copper alloy finds are damaged by the cremation process, but they appear to be 2 separate objects rather than one broken one. Otherwise, they wouldn't be treasure. And it's suggested that they are earrings. The human bone recovered is that of a young man, and the objects buried with him are high status, so he was probably somebody important. At the other end of the scale, it's more normal for PAS to record the mundane finds that would have belonged to normal people. Here in the north, we record a lot of lead spindle whorls. That's a type of find that's rarely recovered from excavations, meaning we don't have very many from dated contexts to help date the ones that we find. The bane of our life is that detecting finds are difficult to date. This is one that was discovered in 2019. Look, another recent find in Addingham. One of the few people who has studied whorls is Penelope Walton-Rogers, and she classified the ones that were found in York by shape to assist with the dating. Using her observations, many of the whorls that we recover seem to be early medieval. This one I can tell you is Form A1, so might date from AD 500 to 850. Now, spindle whorls are often the only suggestion we, as surface finds, have for early medieval activity on a site. So whether this is a true reflection of the material culture or whether the whorls that Walton-Rogers based her research on from York are atypical is not quite clear yet. Either lead whorls are a really exciting indicator of early medieval activity, or many lead whorls aren't as early as the York ones. Either way, lead whorls like this are absolutely crying out for some serious investigation. It's interesting to me that lead whorls are more common in the north and in the Midlands, and there's nearly 7,000 on the database, but most of them are from Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, Norfolk and Leicestershire, rather than any of the other counties. So are they an early marker of the later medieval wool trade? This one's interesting because of these incised marks on what would have been the upper face. They might just be decoration, they might just be damage, but occasionally we find really special whorls which have runic inscriptions. So we're hopeful that perhaps this one is imitating one of those more literate whorls with an inscription. Other finds are interesting because they make you wonder about the personal story, a bit like the signet ring, which I showed you earlier. Well, this is another one. It's not a great photo, I'm afraid. It was taken at an event where I couldn't borrow the object. But it's a forged coin copying a Commonwealth half crown. So it's made of copper alloy and then plated with silver. Now, Commonwealth half crowns are not common. There's 1,000+ Commonwealth coins on the database, but only 18 of them are half crowns. And of those 18, 6 are copies. We know that coins were being forged in 17th century South Yorkshire. There are hoards of coin clippings, like this one. They're known as forgers' hoards, but among the flows, we tend to call them toenail clipping hoards, as well as hoards that include a lot of forged coins as well. They normally date from the reign of Charles I, but that practice of stealing the edge of genuine silver coins to melt down and then used to cover the copper alloy fakes, that clearly continued into the Commonwealth. And it's also well attested in the 18th century, but on gold coins. If you think of the Cragvale coiners in Calderdale, that's a good example. And there's also a blog post that one of my volunteers wrote all about 18th century coin forgery. So you can have a look at that on our website. Now, I know I have slightly stretched the definition, oops, too many windows open. I know I've slightly stretched the definition of local and recent, going back a good 20 years for some of my finds, but I can finish with something that really does fit the bill. We began with the press coverage of PAS's 1.5 millionth find in July 2020. Later that same month, we were in all the papers again, this time because of a sudden, slightly unfathomable interest in all the garden finds that were uncovered during lockdown, or lockdown 1, as I suppose we have to call it now. Those finds were discovered by people who were restricted to home and suddenly doing more gardening as a result. PAS was again in the public eye, and this time the story was also picked up as far afield as the Smithsonian magazine online. And one of the finds they featured was this Neolithic to Bronze Age saddle quern, which I recorded. It was found while digging footings for the posts to support a decking feature and reported to me by the finder's father-in-law, who was one of my regular detectorists. It demonstrates another part of the liaison aspect of the flow role. I had to consult quern specialist John Cruz of the Yorkshire Quern Survey, who confirmed our identification. Now, the smaller stone we think probably isn't associated. It's not the grinding stone that would have gone with this. It's just a round stone from the same area. But what John pointed out about this quern is that querns are usually damaged or decommissioned in some way before they're disposed of, but this one's complete. So he suggested that it could be a placed deposit, intentionally positioned where it was, perhaps as part of an abandonment exercise. If you want to be the first to know about further interesting finds, or to hear when we get to the next milestone, not long till 1 million records, you need to watch this space. And the best way to do that is to follow me on social media. There is a County Pages blog. So if you go to finds.org.uk and go to counties, there's a blog for each of the counties that we cover. And that blog is where we post little stories about the more interesting finds that we record. You can help with that. If you are using PAS data in your research and you want to help advance archaeological knowledge, do share any research you've done. We can put it onto that blog. You can also help by supporting PAS financially. You can buy our books, especially these two, as the funds go straight to PAS, or by making a donation either. The 50 Finds series is getting quite extensive now, covering most counties and also some specialisms, and they're nice little Christmas present books. You can follow the PAS Yorkshire Facebook page, which I run, and lots of us flows are on Twitter, some more active than others. And that's not just us blowing our own trumpet. It's important. By reading and sharing our posts, you can help us with one of our aims, that of sharing archaeological knowledge. And you can help us to promote best practice, because by sharing those posts, you're also sharing our values, and that encourages more finders to do the right thing, more finders to come forward, more finds to be recorded. So you don't even have to be finding archaeology yourself to be part of PAS, which is the largest community archaeology project around. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. That was fabulous. Really interesting. Some really enigmatic objects that came up on screen there. I particularly liked the satyr, the horse on that was fantastic with details, and the size of the joints just made it look quite articulated, like one of those little bendy artistic dolls that you can get for manoeuvring and positioning. Made it look really individualized, and the combination tool, the nutcracker and stamp, that was brilliant as well. Such a lovely idea. I'm glad you've left the contact slide on at the end there, because I'm sure that some members of the audience will have gardens and they've been doing gardening over lockdown and things. So if anyone needs to report anything, would they go to the finds.org.uk to get your details direct from there? Or
yes, there's a contacts page at finds.org.uk, which has got my email address and phone number and everything on. And even though we're working at home, we're still contactable. Email's usually better. And it doesn't matter where you found something. If you live locally, it's easiest to report it to me, even if it's from another part of England or Wales. Don't come to me with foreign stuff though, please. Can't help with that.
Brilliant, thank you, Amy. I wish I had things in my garden like the quernstone. But most that I find is your bit of clay pipe, but that's my city centre garden effectively. We did have a question come in on the chat box on Zoom. Adrian is going to monitor the chat box on YouTube, so Adrian, do feel free to jump in if any questions come in from there. Had one what I thought was excellent question come in from Zainab around the coins associated, coins which have been found. Do we know if any of those are associated with archaeologically known roads, or have they inspired any research or studies into roads around different parts of the countryside, UK and Europe?
Yeah, there's quite a link to roads, but it sometimes needs a bit of unpicking in terms of bias. So a lot of the find spots we see map the modern road system, as I said before, due to access for detectorists. But detectorists also are looking for places which give them lots of finds, and so they will deliberately seek out old routeways and try to get permission there so that they can find lots of things. But sometimes, yeah, you can see the line of now lost pathways going across a field because of the clustering of finds. So definitely there's a relationship there.
Excellent. Hope that question there, Zainab. Adrian, do jump in if any other questions coming from the YouTube channel. One which I found quite interesting was two things I found quite interesting in terms of thought-provoking. When you mentioned at the start around the definition of treasure and having to be deposited with intention for recovery, that's kind of very, it takes quite an assumption around why people were burying things in the past, and in some respect imposes their own opinions today on why things might have been deposited.
Absolutely. And why it was so important to update the law. That was the old law, which was not terribly useful from an archaeological point of view. Currently, there's a review of the Treasure Act happening. We're looking at redefining treasure again. There was a consultation paper came out last year, and the DCMS have looked at all the responses and are now they've decided that they need to consult some more before they can make any decisions. So we've been waiting for years and years and years for the Treasure Act to change again, and there's talk about expanding the definition of treasure. It looks like we're going to be waiting a bit longer. But a lot of my finders were stressing recently that they thought the law had changed and they didn't know what the law was anymore. And no, nothing's changed. We're just asking questions. But it's very difficult, the way laws have to work, to get a law that works from an archaeological point of view, because things like the Crosby Garrett helmet, clearly hugely important, very rare, ought to be a treasure, but isn't gold or silver, so it doesn't meet the criteria. But to try and come up with a wording for a criteria that covers what we don't know we're going to find, and covers something that's really important but not measurable, is difficult. That's why the law usually sticks to the composition of the metal or the age of the object, because they're things that at least in some way can be measured. But the relative significance of things is much more difficult, and that's sort of where we're wrestling with at the moment. But one change to the Treasure Act that we think is likely to happen is to extend the definition to cover single gold coins, certainly Iron Age and Roman gold coins, but possibly not medieval ones. And then that would only give us 10 extra treasure cases every year. They're not too great a burden of work. But we've got to have a cutoff point somewhere, because if you've included all the medieval gold coins, that would be a huge amount of work. You want to avoid everything being treasure as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably related to that is a question that came in from Linda and pulls back to the Silsden hoard. So if you find a coin and you find a coin in an area, how might you then relate that to a hoard found previously in that location, even if there's a significant time gap between the two events of finding?
It can be difficult. It's not always obvious to a finder on the ground whether what you've found is a hoard or not. So the way it works is I seek advice from the treasure team and let them worry about it. But generally, if all the coins are from a very tight area and we know those find spots, and they are coins that aren't commonly found in that general area, you can say on the balance of probability these entered the ground at the same time. So I once had a finder who reported, what king were they? 3 medieval coins, groats, so 4p coins, which are not lost so commonly as loose change. They were all from the Calais Mint, which are less common than the London Mint or the Canterbury Mint, and they were all the same monarch, who also wasn't a particularly prolific monarch. These 3 coins were scattered over a fairly large area, but all within 2 fields, either side of a modern field boundary, not an ancient field boundary. And we decided that because they were the only 3 coins of that monarch of Calais Mint, of that time, of that type, that they were probably associated with each other, because what are the chances of those 3 coins being in that field otherwise? So we declared them as treasure. But sometimes it's a difficult call to make. And that's when we draw on the expertise of the coin specialists at the British Museum.
Cool, thank you. Because I guess the image of the plough damage which you showed from the burials, that really kind of highlights just how much damage agricultural work can do and how far materials could be spread in an agricultural field over several centuries worth of ploughing that can be distributed quite widely across an area. So then tying them back to a single point, you need to look at that wider information sources. So that's really, really useful. Thank you. As I say, do please drop any questions into the Q&A if you have some. I know Adrian's still looking on the YouTube Q&A box. One of the other things which I wondered about as you were talking about the potential for future study. So you mentioned the lead loom weights as being something that could be looked at for further study. As part of the Fines PASS scheme, do you have dedicated research team members who are investigating these different aspects as they come up?
No, don't be silly. There's not enough money for that. No, we would very much welcome collaboration with students, researchers, universities. It's our job to get the data and put it in one place, and it's there available. Now what we want are people to use it, and people are using it. One of the pages on our website is the research tab, and it tells you how many people are currently doing PhDs, masters or undergraduate dissertations based on PAS data, and there are hundreds, if not thousands. And some of those will be a particular parish that one person's investigating, and some will be big collaborative projects like the Warhorse project that's going on at the moment at Exeter, who are among multidisciplinary approaches to medieval war horses, are also looking at all the horse equipment that we've recorded. And I was having a chat with Rob Webley from Warhorse last week about a tournament site on the very edge of South Yorkshire, which he's hoping to look at, which sounds quite interesting. So there are hundreds of research projects going on using our data, and we'd love there to be more. What we do have is Sam Moorhead of the Roman coin fame, based at the British Museum. He is the lead finds advisor on research connections. So if you've got an idea and you want to discuss it with somebody, start off by talking to your flow to see if it's got legs, and then we can put you on to Sam. And yeah, please use our data. We just don't have time. We don't even have time to sort of note down the patterns. We are just recording monkeys desperately scrabbling away, trying to keep up with the volume of finds coming in. But we would love people to sit down and make sense of it all.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. I think that's an excellent place to bring the session to a close. I know it's rapidly approaching the 6:30. Some people will be looking forward to getting some food and returning to their families for the evening. So just again want to say thank you very much, Amy. Thank you everyone for attending, and I hope you've enjoyed the session. It's a bit different as we aren't in the room. We can't give quite as easily a virtual round of applause, but there will be a virtual round of applause going on, I'm sure. Thank you very much. And if anyone on the undergraduate or postgraduate programs does have any ideas for research projects for dissertation, particularly coming up next year or later on this year, please do get in touch with Amy. And if anyone has found any interesting finds during gardening, again from the Bradford area, please do get in touch with Amy. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amy. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
So, do you want to stop the recording, Adrian?